Who did this to them? The voice came out low, almost gentle. The kind of gentle that is more dangerous than screaming. Domingo Duran had not used that voice in years. He used it now standing in a blizzard on a road that should have been empty, staring at a woman collapsed on her knees in the snow, a newborn pressed to her chest. Two small children wrapped around her like they were trying to hold her together with their bodies alone, all of them shaking, all of them silent. A family left to die in the dark. He already knew someone had put them there. He just needed a name. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe right now and follow Christina's journey all the way to the end. And leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The baby had stopped crying 8 minutes ago. That was the number that was destroying Christina Ward from the inside out 8 minutes. Because silence from a 3-week-old in below freezing temperatures was not peace, it was not sleep. It was the beginning of something she could not let herself name. She was still moving. Her legs had passed through pain about a mile back and arrived somewhere beyond it, somewhere numb and mechanical, and she focused everything she had on keeping them going, one foot, then the other. Her coat was unzipped and Daniel was pressed against her chest, skin to skin the way the nurses had shown her in the hospital, that now felt like another lifetime entirely. Mama. Marcus's voice was smaller than she'd ever heard it. He was 7 years old and had never once in 7 years sounded small. Mama, my feet stopped hurting. Christina's stomach dropped. She knew what that meant. That's okay, baby, she said, and the lie came out so clean she almost convinced herself. That means we're almost warm. Keep walking. Are we almost there? Yes, another lie. Millhaven was still 12 miles away, and she had no phone, no car, no plan that had survived contact with this storm. Sophie said nothing. Sophie, 9 years old, had not said a single word since they left the car. She walked with her arms crossed tight over her chest and her jaw set in the way that was so completely her father's jaw that it made Christina's heart do something violent every time she looked at it. Raymond had been dead for 6 weeks. His jaw was on his daughter's face. His debt was on Christina's back. And his newborn son was going quiet against her chest in the cold. Sophie, Christina said, talk to me. About what? Anything, just talk. A pause. Then flat and practical, completely her father's daughter. We should have left yesterday. I know. You knew the storm was coming. Sophie, I'm not mad. I'm just saying we should have left yesterday. Another pause. Dad would have left yesterday. Christina said nothing, because Sophie was right, and because the reason they hadn't left yesterday was a phone call, a blocked number, a man's voice she'd never heard before telling her to stay inside. Stay home, don't go anywhere tonight. And Christina, who had spent 6 weeks taking orders from fear, had decided on that particular afternoon to stop. She'd gotten the children and walked out the front door. And then the car died. The headlights came through the white, like two eyes opening. Christina saw them and felt two things at exactly the same moment: relief so strong it was almost physical pain, and a fear so cold it had nothing to do with the temperature. A woman alone with 3 children on an empty road at night had reasons for both. She'd read enough news. She'd lived enough life. Mom, Marcus said. He'd seen the lights too. Mom, someone's coming. I see it. Should we wave? Every instinct in her body ran in opposite directions at once. Step back, step forward, hikit by signal. She had 3 children. She had a baby who had been quiet for too long. And she had used up every option she'd had before this moment. She stepped into the middle of the road and raised her arm. The vehicle slowed. It stopped 10 feet in front of her, a black SUV, expensive, the engine running, the windows dark. Nothing happened. No door open. No one got out. Just the vehicle sitting there with its lights on her and the storm closing in around all of them. 5 seconds. 10. Mom, Sophie said very quietly from directly behind her. Why isn't anyone? The driver's door opened. The man who stepped out looked at her first, then at her children. Then, and this was the part Christina would not be able to stop thinking about later, he looked at the baby, at the small shape pressed against her chest with the tiny face barely visible over her zipper. And something moved through his expression that she couldn't read and couldn't look away from. He was tall, built through the shoulders like someone had constructed him for a specific serious purpose. His coat was dark, and the way he moved across the snow was quiet and deliberate and completely without hurry, which somehow made her more afraid of him and less afraid of him at the same time. He stopped 4 feet away. He looked at her directly the way very few people look at you, like there was no version of this interaction where he was going to pretend. "Your car broke down," he said. Not a question. 2 miles back. She held his gaze, refused to look away. "We've been walking. In this storm. We didn't have a choice." He looked at the baby again. "How old?" 3 weeks. A muscle moved in his jaw. "Once." He's been quiet. It wasn't a question either, and the fact that he'd noticed that he'd clocked it before she'd said a word sent something cold through her that wasn't the storm. "He needs to get warm," she said. Her voice held. She was proud of it. "Get in the car," he said. "I don't know who you are." "No," he said, "you don't. And then the baby has maybe 15 minutes. Get in the car." She looked at her children. Sophie's expression was unreadable. Marcus had taken Sophie's hand, which he hadn't done in 2 years, because he'd decided holding hands was for little kids. Christina got in the car. The heat came back to her in stages, the way feeling comes back to a limb that's been cut off from blood. First the surface, then something deeper. Then the shaking. Her hands were shaking badly by the time the door closed. She pressed them together and focused on Daniel, checking his color, his breathing, running her fingers along his tiny jaw until he stirred and made a sound, small protesting the sound of someone who has been very cold and is now not, and she turned her face toward the window so no one could see what it did to her face. The man got back in the driver's seat. There was another man in the passenger seat, younger, with precise eyes that moved between the road and the rearview mirror with professional regularity. He had not reacted to any of this. That was its own kind of information. The driver pulled back onto the road without asking where she was going. "What's your name?" he said. "Christina Ward." He nodded, filed it. "Where were you headed?" "Millhaven. My sister lives there." "That's 12 miles. I know how far it is." He glanced at her in the mirror, just once. Something in that glance, not softness exactly, but the acknowledgement that she'd answered back and he'd registered it. "Why were you out in this?" Christina looked at her children. Marcus had stopped shivering. Sophie was watching the driver with the suspicious focus of a child who has recently learned that the world is not what she thought. "I don't answer questions from strangers," Christina said. "That's reasonable," he said, and he stopped asking. They drove in silence for about 30 seconds. Then Marcus said, "Are you in the Mafia?" "Marcus?" Christina started. "I'm just asking." "You don't ask people if they're in the Mafia." "Why not?" The driver said nothing, but Christina, watching his reflection in the dark glass, saw the corner of his mouth move. Not quite a smile. Something smaller. Something that surprised her precisely because it was there at all. "I handle problems," the driver said. "My dad used to say that," Marcus said. "And then because he was 7, he's dead now." The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. "I know," he said quietly. Christina turned and looked at the back of his head. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. He didn't take them to Millhaven. He took them to a house that was warm before they were even inside it. The kind of warm that means money, that means generators, that means someone has made sure every failure point is covered. A woman named Rosa materialized from somewhere inside and removed wet coats and boots from the children with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done not this exactly, but the emergency care crisis management, the logistics of damaged people arriving at odd hours many times before. "Sit," the driver told Christina. "Where are we?" Was he safe? That's not an answer. He looked at her steadily. "You're right." He pulled a chair out at the kitchen table. She didn't want to sit. Her legs were making decisions without her, and she sat anyway, and a mug appeared in front of her, and Rosa took Daniel from her arms with the authority of someone who simply knew more about babies than almost anyone alive, and Christina let him go. And the moment she did something that had been holding itself together inside her chest since the moment the car died, finally fully gave way. She didn't cry, but she pressed her hand over her mouth and she breathed through it, and it took a moment. When she looked up, the driver was watching her, not with pity, not with discomfort, just watching the way you watch something that matters. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be, he said. And he sat down across from her and he put his hands flat on the table and he said, tell me about your husband. His name was Domingo. She got that much. No last name offered, none requested. She told him about Raymond, the official version, first the one she'd given the police, the one she'd given her sister, the careful version, with all the dangerous parts removed. Raymond died. It was an accident. He fell. Domingo listened without interrupting, without expression, without the small sounds people make to signal they're following the hmms and the ICs and the oh no's. He just listened, and it was the most fully listened to she had felt in 6 weeks, and she hated slightly how much that mattered. When she finished, he said, and the part you didn't tell the police. Christina's hands went still around the mug. What makes you think there's another part? Because you're not stupid, Domingo said, and because Raymond Ward didn't fall off a parking structure. His eyes held hers. He was put there. The kitchen was very quiet. Who are you? Christina whispered. Someone who knows what Victor Vulov does to people who owe him money, Domingo said, and someone who knows Raymond owed him a great deal of it. The name hit her like a physical thing. She felt it in her chest, in her hands, in the back of her throat. Victor Vulov. She had spent 6 weeks trying to forget that name, trying to convince herself that if she didn't say it out loud, it had no power, that the debt would dissolve, that the man who'd come to her door 3 days after the funeral had been bluffing. How do you know that name? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Because Vulov and I have a history, Domingo said. Simple. Final. Like he'd already decided she could have that much and not more. What kind of history? The kind that means I understand exactly what kind of danger you're in. He leaned forward slightly. How much does he say Raymond owed him? She told him the number. He didn't blink. That was somehow the most frightening thing that had happened in all night, that she said the number that had been making her unable to breathe for 6 weeks, and Domingo Duran did not blink. And he transferred the debt to you, he said. A man came to my house 3 days after the funeral. He said I had 30 days. She looked at the table. That was 29 days ago. Tonight I got a call, blocked number. A man told me to stay home, that they were watching. Her jaw set. So I left. Domingo was quiet for a long moment. Then the call. What exactly did he say? He said stay inside tonight. He said it wasn't safe to travel. He said, she stopped, replayed it. Something about it had snagged in her mind, and she hadn't had the space to examine it until now. He said, stay home tonight. Your kids need their mother. She looked up. He mentioned my kids specifically. Domingo stood up, slowly. He walked to the window with his back to her and stood there and said nothing for 10 full seconds. Then he turned to Ren in the doorway. Something passed between them, fast silent, the communication of two people who have been through enough that words are optional. Ren left. Domingo turned back to her. His face was composed, but something underneath it had changed, tightened, focused, turned towards something she couldn't see. You're staying here tonight, he said. I have a sister. You're staying here tonight, he said again. Not louder, just more final. Tomorrow I'll take you to your sister. Tonight you and your children are staying here. A pause, please. The please was what did it. Coming from him, from whatever he was, whatever history he carried in the set of his shoulders, and the flatness of his voice, the please landed like something that had cost him something. She nodded. He walked toward the door, and she didn't know why she said it. What she said next, didn't plan it. It just came out the way the truest things do too. Tired to be held back. Why, she said, you don't know me. Why does any of this matter to you? He stopped. He stood with his back to her for a moment. And when he turned, his face had something in it she hadn't seen before, something older than the rest of him, something that had never fully healed. Because my mother stood on a road like that one when I was 9 years old, he said quietly, and nobody stopped. He left, and Christina sat in the warm kitchen with the sound of her children breathing in the next room, and Rosa humming something low to the baby, and she held the weight of what he'd said, and for the first time in 6 weeks, the first time since Raymond died and the world fell apart at the seams, she did not feel entirely alone. Upstairs, Ren spoke without preamble. The call came from Petrov, Vulov's number 2. Confirmed? 30 minutes ago. Domingo stood at the window. Below, the storm had taken everything road tree line, the marks his own boots had left coming in. What was the plan for tonight, he asked. Ren was quiet for exactly 1 beat too long. Gas leak, he said, at the house, while she was inside. Another pause. With the kids. The room went absolutely still. Domingo did not move. His reflection in the dark glass showed nothing, but his right hand hanging at his side slowly closed. The children would have been there, he said. Yes. Silence long enough to be a decision. Find Petrov, Domingo said. His voice was the quietest it had been all night. Don't call. Don't send a message. Find him and bring him to me. A pause. And Ren, make sure Vulov knows I found them first. Ren nodded once and was gone. Domingo stood at the window and looked out at the white nothing of the storm and thought about a woman on her knees in the snow and a baby going quiet in 29 days of a debt that was never hers to carry. Then he thought about Viktor Vulov, and he began to plan. Christina did not sleep the way people sleep when they feel safe. She slept the way people sleep when they are exhausted beyond the reach of fear, not restfully, but completely, like a circuit that is finally blown. And when she woke, it took her 3 full seconds to remember where she was, and in those 3 seconds she reached instinctively for Daniel before she was even fully conscious, her hand moving across the surface of the bed before her eyes were open. He was there, warm, breathing. Rosa had left him in a small basket beside the bed, tucked in with a blanket that smelled of lavender and something older. Something that reminded Christina of her grandmother's house, and that scent alone nearly broke her open before the day had even started. She lay still for a moment and listened. Marcus was breathing slow and deep in the other bed. Sophie was curled on her side facing the wall, which was how Sophie slept when she was processing something she hadn't decided to talk about yet. Outside the window, the storm had dropped to something quieter, still falling, but without the rage of the night before. Last night, the road, the cold, the baby going quiet. Domingo. She sat up. The house was not silent the way empty houses are silent. It had the particular quality of a place where people are awake and moving, but doing so carefully aware of sleepers. She could hear low voices somewhere below. The smell of coffee was moving up through the floors. She checked the time on a small clock on the nightstand, 6:47 a.m., and then sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands for exactly 30 seconds and let herself feel everything she hadn't let herself feel the night before. 30 seconds. That was all she allowed. Then she stood up, checked the baby one more time, checked her children, and went downstairs. Ren was at the kitchen table with the laptop and a cup of coffee and the specific stillness of someone who has been awake for hours and has made peace with that fact. He looked up when she came in. He didn't say good morning. She was starting to understand that Ren operated on a strict economy of words. He said what was necessary and nothing that wasn't. Domingo, she asked. On a call. He nodded toward the coffee. It's fresh. She poured a cup. She stood at the counter and drank it standing up because sitting felt too comfortable, too settled, too much like she was accepting something she hadn't decided to accept yet. How long was he on the phone? She asked. Most of the night. She set the cup down. Because of me. Ren looked at her. Because of Vulov, he said. There's a difference. Is there? He considered this with the seriousness he appeared to bring to everything. Yes, he said. Vulov is a problem that was going to need handling regardless. You just made it urgent. Christina wrapped both hands around the mug. That's a very calm way to talk about people who want to kill my family. I find that calm is more useful than the alternative. He closed the laptop. Your children still sleeping? Yes. Good, let them sleep. A pause. Rosa will make breakfast when they're up. She'll want to feed them until they can't move. Let her. It makes her happy. Christina almost smiled. Almost. You've known her a long time. Since I was 12. He said it without elaboration and in a tone that closed the door on further questions. And Christina, who had her own closed doors, respected it. She heard footsteps on the stairs, unhurried, deliberate, and then Domingo came into the kitchen. He was in a dark sweater, no coat, and he looked like a man who had not slept but had made a decision somewhere in the not sleeping that had settled something inside him. His eyes found her immediately. "How are the children?" he asked. "Still asleep." "The baby?" "Good. Warm." She paused. "He's okay. Because of you." Something shifted in his expression, a discomfort with the gratitude she realized, as if being thanked for this particular thing was harder to receive than she would have expected. "Sit down," he said. "There are things you need to know." So she sat. He sat across from her, and he put a phone on the table between them. Not his, she noticed a different one, and he looked at her in that direct way of his that she was beginning to recognize as simply how he was. No softening, no performance of gentleness, just the truth landing flat and clean. "Last night while you were sleeping," he said, "we confirmed what I suspected about the phone call you received." Christina's hands went still. "The man who told you to stay home was Petrov, Viktor Vulov's second in command." He held her gaze. "The reason he wanted you to stay home had nothing to do with your safety." She already knew this. Somewhere under everything she'd been carrying, she already knew. But hearing it said out loud in daylight with her children sleeping upstairs, it landed differently. "How bad?" she asked. "They had a plan for last night. Your house, a gas line, and something that would have looked like an accident." He paused for only a beat. "Your children would have been inside." The coffee mug was in her hand, and then it was on the table, and she didn't entirely remember putting it down. The room didn't spin, she wouldn't allow it to spin, but something inside her went very, very still, in the way that precedes something enormous. "He was going to kill my children," she said. Not a question. Her voice was someone else's voice, flat, distant, like she was reading a sentence in a language she was still translating. "To eliminate the debt entirely," Domingo said. "No heirs, no witnesses, no loose ends." "Their children." It came out almost confused, as if some fundamental logic had failed. "They're 7 and 9 years old and a 3-week-old baby." "I know. That's not a debt collection. That's—" She stopped. She pressed both hands flat on the table. She breathed. "Where is Petrov now?" Ren, from his position at the counter, looked up. Domingo said, "We're handling that." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He leaned forward slightly. "Christina, what I need you to understand right now is that you and your children cannot go back to that house. Not today, not this week, possibly not for longer than that." She looked at him. "You're telling me I've lost my home?" "I'm telling you your home is not currently safe. There's a difference." "You keep saying there's a difference," she said, and there was something sharp in it. Not anger at him, but a sharpness born of exhaustion and fear, and 6 weeks of being told things that were technically true and practically devastating. "The difference doesn't change where my children sleep tonight." He held her gaze. He didn't look away, didn't hedge, didn't perform regret. "No," he said, "it doesn't. That's why you're here." Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks hair, sideways from sleep, wearing the sweater Rosa must have left out for him, slightly too big, the sleeves covering his hands. He looked at the adults at the table with the particular radar of a child who has recently learned to read rooms. "Is something bad happening?" he asked. "No, baby," Christina said, and the lie was so fast and so practiced it scared her. "Come have breakfast." Marcus looked at Domingo. "Are you going to make the bad stuff stop?" The question sat in the kitchen like something dropped. Domingo looked at the 7-year-old in the too big sweater and said without hesitation, "Yes." Marcus nodded seriously, apparently satisfied, and climbed onto a stool at the counter and asked Rosa if there were eggs. Christina watched Domingo watch her son and saw something move through his face that she thought he probably didn't know was visible. Breakfast happened in the particular way of mornings after disasters, too ordinary, too warm, the coffee too good, the food arriving in quantities that suggested Rosa had been waiting years for someone to cook for. Sophie ate with focused intensity and said little. Marcus asked Rosa 14 questions about the house, 3 of which Rosa answered, and the rest of which she deflected with the practiced ease of someone who understood that the questions were really just noise a child makes to feel like the world is normal. Domingo made one phone call from the kitchen in a language Christina didn't speak, and the conversation was short and ended with something that sounded like a decision. When he hung up, he sat back down and looked at Christina. "There's a place," he said, "about 40 minutes from here. A house it's not being used, clean, safe, stocked. You could take the children there while we deal with Vulov. While you deal with Vulov, she repeated. What does that mean? It means the debt Raymond owed is going to be resolved. Raymond owed him $260,000, Christina said. I don't know where you find that kind of money. I do, Domingo said. She stared at him. You'd pay it. I'd resolve it. His voice didn't change. Paying is one option. Something in the way he said it made her skin prickle. She thought about asking what the other options were. She decided she didn't want to know. Or more accurately, she decided that knowing would change the nature of what she was accepting from him, and she wasn't ready to examine that. Why would you do that? She said. $260,000 that's not nothing. That's not a kindness, that's a decision. Yes, he said. It is. So why? He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, she was learning to read the different kinds of his silences, but actually considering it. As if he owed her the real answer and was finding the right way to give it. Because Vulov has been operating in this city for 11 years, he said. And in 11 years, he has destroyed 43 families that I know of. People who owed him money, people who got in his way, people who simply knew something they shouldn't. He paused. Raymond is not the first. Your children are not the first children. He looked at the table. I've been looking for a reason to end this for a long time. You gave me one. I gave you a reason, Christina said slowly. Or I gave you a target. He met her eyes. Both, he said. I won't lie to you about that. Ren made a small sound at the counter that might have been approval. Christina looked at her children. Marcus was showing Rosa something on his hand, a small scar, she thought from a bicycle accident 2 summers ago, explaining it in the elaborate detail that Marcus brought to all stories. Sophie was watching Domingo with the same careful assessment she'd been giving him since the car, and Christina recognized the expression because it was one she saw in her own mirror, the expression of someone deciding whether to trust. What do you need from me? Christina asked. Nothing, Domingo said. That's not true. He looked at her. You need me to take my children to the safe house and stay there and not contact anyone who could be monitored. You need me to trust you with something that could get us all killed if it goes wrong. You need me to not ask questions about what you're doing or how you're doing it. She held his gaze. That's not nothing. That's everything. A beat of silence. Then Ren said from the counter without looking up, she's right. Domingo said nothing for a moment. And then, and it was small, almost invisible, he nodded. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. It might have been the most unexpected thing he'd said to her yet. Don't be sorry, she said. Just be honest. That's all I'm asking. All right. He folded his hands on the table. Honestly, this is going to take 2 to 3 days. Honestly, Vulov has people watching your sister's address, which means Millhaven is not safe right now. Honestly, the safest thing for your children is the house I'm offering, with people I trust watching the outside. He held her gaze. And honestly, I will not let what happened last night happen again. You can't promise that. No, he said. I can't, but I'm telling you anyway. Cheyenne. They left within the hour. Rosa packed a bag for the children without being asked, snacks. Extra blankets, a stuffed animal she produced from somewhere that Marcus immediately attached himself to, with no apparent self-consciousness. Domingo spoke to 2 men in the hallway that Christina hadn't seen before, both of them, listening with the specific posture of people who were used to following instructions exactly. She was gathering her things in the bedroom when Sophie appeared in the doorway. Mom. Almost ready, Soph. Mom. The tone was different, sharper, the kind that meant Sophie had something to say that she'd been holding on to. Christina straightened and turned. Sophie was leaning against the door frame with her arms crossed, 9 years old and carrying the weight of someone twice that. Is he going to get hurt? Sophie asked. Domingo. Christina looked at her daughter. I don't know. And because of us, is he going to get hurt because of us? Sophie. Dad got hurt because of his choices, Sophie said. The words were careful, deliberate. This was clearly not the first time they'd moved through her mind. But this is different. This isn't Domingo's choice. This is being forced on him because we showed up. He doesn't see it that way. How do you know? Because I asked him. Sophie chewed on this. Do you trust him? It was the right question. It was the only question. Christina thought about what trust had cost her over the last 6 years, trusting Raymond's assurances, trusting that things would work out, trusting that the numbers she didn't understand were fine, that the calls he took outside were work, that the distance between them was just stress. She thought about what it felt like now to carry the wreckage of all that misplaced trust. I trust him more than I've trusted any within a long time, she said, and I don't completely understand why. Sophie considered this with her father's jawline and her own ancient eyes. Then she nodded once the way Domingo nodded final closed and went to get her brother. The drive to the safe house took 43 minutes. Domingo drove. Ren sat up front. Christina sat in the back between Marcus and the baby's carrier and watched the snow-covered road unreal ahead of them and thought about $260,000 in the name Victor Vulov and what it meant that a man she had met in a blizzard 14 hours ago was the most stable thing in her world. Halfway there, her phone charged now, something Rosa had handled without being asked, buzzed with a blocked number. Her stomach lurched. She stared at the screen. The buzz came again. "Don't answer it," Domingo said without looking back. He'd seen it somehow in the mirror, or simply knew it was coming. "What if it's Petrov," he said, "or someone calling on his behalf?" "How do you know?" "Because we have Petrov," he said. Flat, simple, final. The phone buzzed a third time and then stopped. Marcus, who had been quietly investigating the stuffed animal's stitching, looked up. "Who was that? Wrong number," Christina said. Marcus looked at the phone, then at his mother, then at the back of Domingo's head. He had the look of a child who knows when adults are simplifying things for him and who has decided for the moment to allow it. "Okay," he said, and went back to the stuffed animal. Christina looked out the window. The snow was still falling. The road was empty. Her children were warm and fed and breathing. She thought about a gas line, a spark, an accident that wouldn't have been an accident. She thought about how close. She didn't cry. She looked out at the white nothing of the storm, and she made herself a promise to herself, and somewhere underneath that to Raymond, and to the version of herself who had stood on a broken road in the dark with a dying baby and raised her arm anyway. She was done being afraid. Well, whatever came next, she was going to face it standing. Beside her, Marcus leaned against her arm and fell asleep. The stuffed animal dropped into his lap. She put her arm around him and held on. Domingo's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror. He held them for just a moment. Then he looked back at the road. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. The safe house smelled like no one had been there in a while, that particular stillness of a place that has been waiting, but it was warm. Within 20 minutes of arrival, the heat coming up through the floors the way it does in houses built by people who understood that warmth is not a luxury. Rosa had called ahead apparently because there was food in the kitchen fresh enough to have been stocked that morning, and the beds were made, and there was a box of children's books on the floor of the second bedroom that had no explanation and that Marcus fell on like it was treasure. Christina stood in this main room and listened to her children settle and felt the silence of the place press against her. Domingo had not come inside. He had walked them to the door, spoken briefly to the two men positioned outside, one at the front, one she'd clocked at the rear corner of the house, visible for just a moment through the side window, and then turned to her in the doorway and said, "Don't open the door for anyone I haven't told you to expect. Don't use your phone except to call this number." He had handed her a card, plain, just 11 digits. "I'll be in contact by tonight." "And if you're not," she'd asked. He had looked at her for a beat. "Then call the number anyway. Ren will answer." She had wanted to ask more. She had about 40 questions lined up and ready, and she had looked at his face, the absolute settled quality of it, the decision already made, the direction already chosen, and she had asked none of them. Because she understood, in the way you understand things you wish you didn't, that what Domingo was walking toward today was not something questions could improve. She had nodded. He had held her gaze for one moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he was gone. That had been 4 hours ago. Marcus had finished 2 books and started a third. Sophie had found a deck of cards and was playing solitaire at the kitchen table with the methodical focus she brought to things when her mind was working on something else underneath. Daniel slept in his carrier, full and warm, making the small sounds of a baby who has decided, at least temporarily, that the world is acceptable. Christina was going out of her mind. She stood at the window, not looking out, because Domingo had told her to stay back from the windows, and she was following that instruction to the letter, and she thought about Victor Vulov. She had never seen the man. She had only the name written in Raymond's handwriting on a notepad in their kitchen, and a voice on a phone 3 days after the funeral, and the number that had been delivered to her like a verdict, $260,000. She had asked Raymond once about the money, 6 months before he died. She had found a transfer in their account, a withdrawal she didn't recognize more than she wanted to think about. And she had asked him carefully, the way you ask when you already sense the answer is going to be something you can't put back once you've heard it. Raymond had said it was a business thing. He'd said it was temporary. He'd said not to worry. She had let herself believe him. That belief had put her on a road in a blizzard with a 3-week-old baby. That belief had transferred $260,000 of debt to her name. That belief was why 2 men were standing outside a house she'd never seen before, while a man she'd met 20 hours ago was somewhere in this city making decisions that would determine whether her children were safe. She pressed her forehead against the wall beside the window and breathed. "Mom?" Sophie from the kitchen table, not a question. Just Mom. "I'm okay," Christina said. "I didn't ask." "I know." She pushed off the wall. "I know you didn't." Sophie looked up from her cards, her eyes. Raymond's eyes, that particular shade of dark, serious brown, held her mother's with an expression that was too old and too knowing and too much like grief for a 9-year-old to be wearing. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes." More than last night, Christina considered lying, decided against it. Differently than last night. Last night I was scared of the cold. Right now I'm scared of... She stopped, started again. "I'm scared of things I can't see." Sophie looked at her cards for a moment. "Dad used to say that the things you can't see can't hurt you if you keep moving." "Your dad said a lot of things." "I know." A pause. "I know he was wrong about some of them." Christina crossed the room and sat down across from her daughter and put her hands on the table between them, not reaching out, just there. Available. Sophie looked at them for a moment. Then she put one of her hands over her mother's. Just one. Small and warm and completely her own. They sat like that for a minute without speaking. Marcus appeared in the doorway with a book about trains. "Did you know the longest train ever recorded was in Australia? And it was 4.5 miles long," he announced. "I did not know that," Christina said. "It had 6,872 cars." He came into the kitchen and sat down between them, apparently having decided that wherever the adults were was where he needed to be, and opened the book again. "Domingo would probably find that interesting." Sophie looked at her brother. "Why would Domingo find that interesting?" "Because he seems like a person who thinks big things are interesting." Marcus turned a page. "Big things that move. Trains are big and they move." Christina looked at her son and thought, "You are going to be okay. Whatever happens, you are going to be okay." The thought arrived with such force that it was almost physical. Her phone buzzed. It was the number on the card. "It's Ren, the voice said before she could speak. "Are you settled?" "Yes." She stood up and moved to the hallway and away from the children. "What's happening?" "We had a conversation with Petrov." The way he said conversation told her most of what she needed to know about what that had actually meant. "And he confirmed the plan for last night. He also confirmed something else." A pause, the kind that means what comes next is being chosen carefully. "Raymond didn't fall." "I know that." "You suspected it. Now you have confirmation. Petrov gave us the name of the man who was there." Another pause. It was Vulov himself. The hallway went very quiet. Christina pressed the phone against her ear and stood very still and let that land. "Vulov was there personally," she said. "Yes." Why would he..." She stopped. "Raymond owed him money. People owe people money all the time. Why would Vulov personally?" "Because Raymond wasn't just a debtor," Ren said. "Raymond knew something. Petrov told us that 3 years ago Raymond was present at a meeting. A meeting Vulov has been very careful to make sure there's no record of. Raymond was there as a courier. He didn't understand what he was walking into, but he saw things." A beat. "Vulov has been waiting for the right moment to clean that up." The debt was an excuse. Christina leaned against the wall. The cold of it came through her shirt, and she was grateful for it. It kept her grounded, kept her thinking. So Raymond died because of something he didn't even know he knew. That's what we believe, yes. She thought about Raymond, about the man she had married, and the man she had slowly realized she was living with, and the growing distance between those two people. She thought about the calls outside and the money she didn't understand, and the way he'd stopped sleeping properly in the last year of his life. She had attributed it to stress, to the debt, to whatever he wouldn't tell her. He had been carrying the knowledge of what he'd seen, walking around with it inside him, and she had never known. "Where is Domingo?" she asked, handling the next part. "Ren," her voice dropped. "Where is he? Is he safe?" A small pause, enough to tell her the answer was complicated. "He knows what he's doing," Ren said, which was not the same thing as yes. "Tell him," she stopped. "Tell him the kids asked about him." "He'll know what that means," Ren said, and ended the call. She stood in the hallway for a long moment after the call ended. Then she went back to the kitchen and sat down and picked up the deck of cards Sophie had abandoned and began to shuffle them, just for something to do with her hands, just to keep the mechanical part of her brain occupied while the rest of it worked. Raymond had witnessed something 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Marcus had been 4, and Sophie had been 6, and Raymond had come home from a business trip. She remembered it vaguely, one of the many trips that had blurred together in those years, looking tired in a way that was different from regular tired. She had asked if he was all right. He had said yes. She had believed him. She had believed him so many times. The anger came in then the way it did sometimes in the middle of the fear, hot and clarifying, and not entirely fair because Raymond was dead, and anger at the dead is a complicated and lonely business. But it came anyway. He had known he was in danger. He had known for 3 years that Viktor Vulov had a reason to want him gone, and he had not told her. He had not packed up the family and moved. He had not gone to the police or to anyone apparently who could have helped. He had just kept moving forward, paying what he could, hoping the thing he was afraid of would stay far enough behind him, until it didn't, until it caught up with him on the top floor of a parking structure on Harbor Street and threw him off. And now it was coming for her children. She set the cards down. She looked at the ceiling. She said very quietly so that Marcus couldn't hear from the other room, "I needed you to tell me, Raymond. I needed you to tell me." No answer. Just the house settling around her and Daniel making a small sound in his carrier, and the weight of a marriage that had contained more secrets than she'd been allowed to know. The afternoon moved slowly and then suddenly not. She was reading to Marcus the train book, his request, which she had read with more enthusiasm than she genuinely felt, because he needed her to be present, and she was going to be present if it killed her when her phone rang. Not the card number, her own number. Unknown. Her whole body went tight. She handed the book to Marcus. "Keep reading. I'll be right back." She walked to the kitchen. She answered, "Mrs. Ward." The voice was accented smooth, carrying the particular quality of a man who has never in his life had to raise it to be heard. "I hope the children are comfortable." Everything in her went cold. "Who is this?" "I think you know who this is," the voice said. And she did. She did know because the voice carried the weight of the name she'd been afraid to say out loud for 6 weeks. "You've been a very difficult woman to reach. You shouldn't have this number." "I have many things I shouldn't have," Viktor Vulov said. "It's rather a habit of mine." A pause, almost conversational, almost pleasant. "I understand you've made a new friend." She said nothing. "Mr. Duran is a capable man," Vulov continued. "I have a great deal of respect for his capabilities. Which is why I want you to understand something. Mrs. Ward, something he may not have told you." Another pause. "The debt your husband owed me is not the only thing at stake here. Mr. Duran has his own history, his own debts. And a man with his particular set of past decisions cannot afford to make new enemies of my stature." His voice dropped slightly. "Tell him to step back. Tell him to let this resolve itself naturally, and I will consider the debt settled." Christina's hand was gripping the phone hard enough that her fingers ached. "You were going to kill my children," she said. "Last night, a gas leak. My children." A beat of silence. "Unfortunate measures that have since become unnecessary. You weren't where you were supposed to be." His voice remained even. "That situation can be avoided entirely if Mr. Duran withdraws and you and I come to a private arrangement." "I'll tell him you called," Christina said, and she ended the call. Her hands were shaking. She stood in the kitchen and breathed through it, one breath, two, three, and then she called the number on the card. Ren picked up on the first ring. I know, he said before she spoke. He called you. You knew he was going to, Yaitu. We suspected he'd try to go around Domingo. He was going to use you as leverage. A pause. What did he say? She told him, precisely and quickly in the order it happened, because she understood now that accuracy mattered, that details mattered, that the difference between a word he'd used and a word she substituted could mean something she couldn't calculate. Ren was quiet for a moment. The part about Domingo's history, he said, his own debts. What was your read? It was a threat, a real one. He wasn't bluffing. He was too calm to be bluffing. She hesitated. Ren, is there something about Domingo I should know? Something Vulov can actually use? A long pause. Longer than Ren's pauses usually were. There's a history, Ren said carefully, between Domingo and Vulov. That's not new information. What Vulov is implying that Domingo can be pressured through it, that's the bluff. You sound like you're choosing your words very carefully. I always choose my words carefully, Ren said. It's kept me alive. A beat. Tell the children Ren says they're doing well. We'll be there within the hour. He ended the call. Christina stood with the phone in her hand and felt the pieces she'd been given. Domingo's mother on a road. Vulov's implication of history. A debt that wasn't only Raymond's, and the particular quality of Ren's pause. She felt all of these things arranging themselves in her mind into a shape she couldn't quite see, yet the way puzzle pieces assemble themselves in your peripheral vision when you're not quite looking directly at them. Whatever Domingo's history with Vulov was, it wasn't simple, it wasn't incidental, and he hadn't told her. He arrived 52 minutes later. He came in the door with Ren behind him, and he looked at her, immediately checked her, the children in the room, with the efficiency of someone completing a task he'd assigned himself. He was wearing the same dark clothes as that morning, but something about him had shifted. He was the same in every measurable way, and different in the way that only shows in the eyes of people who have recently done something they cannot take back. You spoke to him, he said, not a question. He called my number, she said. He called my actual number, Domingo, not the blocked line, my number that he should not have. I know, we're looking at how he got it. He told me to tell you to step back. She watched his face. He said you had your own history with him, your own debts. She held his gaze. He said a man with your past decisions couldn't afford to make an enemy of his stature. Domingo was very still. He was trying to use me to get to you, she said. But that only works if there's something real underneath it. Is there? The room was quiet except for Marcus in the other room, still reading about trains with absolute oblivious peace. Domingo looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ren. Ren's expression was perfectly neutral in the way that is its own form of opinion. Yes, Domingo said finally. There's something real underneath it. Tell me, Christina. You said you'd be honest with me, she said. Last night at the table, you said that was all you were asking. That goes both ways. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it. Tell me. He pulled out a chair. He sat down. He put his hands on the table the way he had the night before, flat open, and he looked at her with something in his face that was the closest she'd seen him come to visible cost. 12 years ago, he said, I worked for Vulov. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Not the way Petrov works for him, Domingo said. His voice stayed level steady, without apology, but without the distance of a man who's made his peace with everything either. I was younger. I had reasons that felt like justifications at the time. I spent 4 years in his organization. He looked at the table for just a moment, then back up at her. I left. It wasn't clean. People who leave Vulov don't leave cleanly. But you left, she said. I left, he said. And I have spent 8 years building something that is not his. And Vulov has spent 8 years waiting for an opportunity to remind me that he knows exactly what I did during those 4 years. He paused. He is not wrong that he has information about me that could cause significant damage. What he is wrong about is that I'm still afraid of it. Christina looked at him. She thought about all the things she'd accepted on faith in the last 24 hours. She thought about what Sophie had asked, do you trust him, and what she'd answered. She thought about her baby breathing quietly in his carrier, and her daughter playing solitaire, and her son reading about trains alive warm, and here because this man had stopped his car on a dark road. Does what you did for Vulov, does it change what you're doing now? She asked. He met her eyes. No. Does it mean you're going to lose this fight with him? No. Then it doesn't change anything for me either, she said. Something moved across his face. She couldn't name it exactly. It was the face of a man receiving something he'd been carrying the absence of for a long time. Ren cleared his throat quietly from near the door. There's something else, he said. Petrov gave us one more piece before we finish with him. He looked at Domingo, then at Christina. Vulov has a meeting tomorrow night. Fixed location. We know the address. A pause. It's the only time in the next 30 days he'll be outside his primary building and away from his full security. One window. Domingo looked at Ren. Ren looked back. It's also the location, Onanin, Ren said more quietly, where Vulov keeps his records. Everything, every transaction, every arrangement, every name. 12 years of it. His eyes moved to Domingo, including the 4 years that concern you. Christina watched Domingo, watched the weight of it move through him, the decision forming somewhere behind his eyes, not impulsive, not reckless, but inevitable. The way a door opening is inevitable once someone has chosen to reach for the handle. How long do we have? Domingo asked. 18 hours, Ren said. Domingo nodded once, then he looked at Christina, really looked at her in that way of his that had no performance in it, no distance, no protection, and she saw in his face something she hadn't seen there before. Fear. Not for himself, for her. For the children in the other room. For what it would mean to them if 18 hours from now he didn't come back. I need you to stay here tonight, he said. I need you to stay here and keep the children calm and trust me one more time. I've trusted you every time so far, she said. I know. He held her gaze. I'm asking for one more. In the other room, Marcus laughed at something in the book, a bright, unguarded sound that had no knowledge of anything that surrounded it. Christina looked at Domingo. Come back, she said. Whatever else happens, come back. He said nothing. He just held her eyes for a moment that felt like more than a moment. Then he stood. He straightened his coat. He said something brief to Ren in that low voice she couldn't decode, and he walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He did not turn around. Mrs. Ward, he said, your husband didn't deserve what happened to him, and you didn't deserve any of what came after. A beat. By tomorrow, neither of those things will be unpaid for. Then he was gone, and the door closed, and Christina stood in the center of the room listening to her son laugh about trains in the next room, and she pressed her fist against her sternum, against the place where the fear lived, and she breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. She was still standing. The night was the longest of Christina's life, and that was saying something because the night Daniel was born, Raymond not answering his phone, her sister driving 90 miles in the rain, Christina alone in a hospital bed, convinced she was going to do this without anyone who loved her, had felt like it lasted a week. This was longer. She put the children to bed at 8:30. Marcus went easily worn out from the day, and the strangeness of it clutching the stuffed animal Rosa had packed like it was an old friend. Sophie took longer. She lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling and finally said without preamble, he went to go deal with Vulov, didn't he? Christina sat on the edge of the bed. Yes. Is it dangerous? Yes. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Is he going to be okay? I think so. That's not the same as yes. No, Christina said, it's not. She smoothed the blanket over her daughter's shoulder. But I believe it. There's a difference between thinking and believing. Sophie looked at her. Mom, are we going to be okay? Like actually okay, not just tonight. Christina held her daughter's gaze and did not look away and did not perform certainty she didn't have. I believe that too, she said, more than I've believed anything in a while. Sophie accepted this. She closed her eyes. In 4 minutes, she was asleep, the clean, sudden sleep of a child who has used up everything she had. Christina sat there another minute, just watching her breathe. Then she went to the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, and sat down to wait. She heard from Ren at 11:14. 3 words in position. Quiet. She typed back. Children are asleep. She stared at the screen, waiting for more. Nothing came. She set the phone face up on the table where she could see it and went back to the coffee and the silence and the particular texture of waiting when you have no power over the outcome and no information about the process and nothing to do but remain functional in case someone needs you. She thought about Domingo, about what he'd said at the door. Your husband didn't deserve what happened to him, and you didn't deserve any of what came after. She turned those words over in her mind, the way you turn over something you have found and aren't sure yet whether it's valuable or whether it just looks like it is. What she kept coming back to was not the words themselves, but the way they'd been said, not as comfort, not as a gift, but as a statement of fact that he intended to act on. The difference mattered. Raymond had said kind things. Raymond had said he loved her, and she believed it in the way you believe something that is true but insufficient. He had loved her and kept things from her, and the combination had put her on a road in a blizzard. Domingo had known her for 30 hours and had given her accurate information every time she asked for it. Even the thing that was hardest to give his history with Vulov, the 4 years he had given it when she pushed. He hadn't made her feel foolish for pushing. He hadn't retreated into reassurances that cost him nothing. She didn't know what to do with any of this. She knew it was not the right time to figure it out. She filed it in the place where she put things that needed to be returned to later, when her children were safe, and she had the luxury of processing something that wasn't a crisis. Her phone lit up at 11:51. Change of plan, stay away from windows. She was standing before the thought completed itself.
Gustavo.
She checked the children first, both asleep. Daniel breathing slow and steady in his carrier. She pulled the bedroom door halfway closed and went back to the kitchen and typed, "What happened?" The response took 4 minutes. 4 minutes was an eternity. Vulov moved the meeting. Different location. We're adjusting. Then 2 men outside your location. Ours. Don't worry about them. She typed, "Are you okay?" 90 seconds. Yes, one word, she breathed. Then, "There's a complication. I'll explain when I'm back. Keep the kids calm." She stared at the screen. Complication was not a word she wanted to see at midnight from a man who was somewhere in this city going up against Victor Vulov. She typed, "How bad?" No response. She set the phone down. She stood up. She walked the length of the kitchen and back. She sat down. She stood up again. She was doing this, the pacing, the repetition, the useless physical motion of a person whose mind is running ahead of what their body can do when she heard something. Not outside, inside. A creak upstairs. She froze. The safe house had 2 floors. The children were upstairs. The men Domingo trusted were outside. There was no reason for a sound on the 2nd floor. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. She picked Oabe's largest thing within reach, a cast iron pan Rosa would have approved of, and she went to the bottom of the stairs and listened. Silence. Then Marcus said sleepily, "Mom?" She let out a breath that took half her body with it. "I'm here, baby. Go back to sleep." "I had a bad dream." "I know, it's okay. Sleep." The sound of sheets settling, then quiet again. She stood at the bottom of the stairs with a cast iron pan in her hand and realized her own heartbeat had been loud enough to hear for the last 90 seconds. She set the pan down. She pressed her back against the wall, and she laughed a short, quiet, slightly unhinged laugh that she immediately covered with her hand because it was the kind of laugh that is 4 steps from crying, and she was not going to cry tonight. She went back to the kitchen. She picked up the phone. A new message from Ren Vulov sent 2 men to the sister's address. "We intercepted. No one was hurt." Her sister, Ellen, who lived in Millhaven and had no idea any of this was happening because Christina had called her 2 days ago and said she'd be coming to visit and then stopped calling because her phone had died in a blizzard and she'd been swept into a completely different universe. She typed fast, "My sister is she. She's fine. Our people got there first. She doesn't know anything happened." Christina set the phone down and put her face in her hands. Ellen, 53 years old substitute teacher, 2 cats in a garden, and no idea that her address had been used as bait in something she would never fully understand. Fine. She was fine, because Domingo had thought ahead the way he seemed to think ahead, about everything the way he ran calculations that other people didn't even know needed to be run. She picked the phone back up. "Thank him for me," she typed to Ren. "Tell him yourself," Ren wrote back. "He'll be there in an hour." Sim, he came through the door at 1:23 in the morning, and he was intact. That was the first thing she checked. The way you check the thing you've been dreading without letting yourself acknowledge you've been dreading it. He was intact and Ren was behind him, and they both had the quality of men who had been through something and come out the other side still upright, which was not the same as unaffected. Sit down, Christina said before he could speak. There's coffee. He sat. She poured. She sat across from him and looked at him and said, Tell me what happened. He wrapped his hands around the mug, and she noticed she filed it because she noticed everything. Now, she had been noticing everything for 36 hours that his right hand had been recently bandaged. Not hospital bandaged, the practiced economical self-bandaging of someone who has done it before and treats it as paperwork. You're hurt, she said, slightly. How slightly? I've had worse paper cuts, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved and she felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched since 11:51. Tell me what happened, she said again. He told her. Vulov had moved the meeting tipped off, which meant there was a leak somewhere in Domingo's information chain, a detail that landed in the room with weight because it had implications neither of them said aloud. The new location had been improvised. The records Ren had described 12 years of Vulov's transactions, including the 4 years that concerned Domingo, had been at the original location, not the new one. They hadn't gotten to the records. So we're back to zero, Christina asked. Not zero, Domingo said. We got something. One of Vulov's men, not Petrov, someone lower made a different calculation tonight. He looked at the mug. He decided that Vulov's window was closing. He brought documents. He looked up. Not everything. But enough. Raymond's name is in there, the parking structure, the men who were there. A pause, oh no. It's enough for the right authorities to move on. You're going to go to the police. Not the police, he said. There's a federal task force that has been building a case on Vulov for 4 years. They've been waiting for documentation that connects him directly to the homicide rather than just financial crimes. He held her gaze. Raymond's death closes that gap. Christina was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table. She thought about Raymond, about the version of him she'd loved, and the version that had made choices he'd never explained to her, and the version that had died alone on a parking structure because he'd accidentally seen something he shouldn't have. She thought about what it meant to have his death mean something, to have it counted. Will they use it? She asked. The task force. I've already made contact, Domingo said. Tonight. They're moving on it in the morning. And Vulov. By tomorrow afternoon, Vulov will have a problem significantly larger than either of us. A beat. The debt will be formally voided as part of the asset freeze. His lawyers will be too occupied to pursue collection. He set down the mug. It won't be over overnight, but the threat to you and your children, that's done. Christina looked at him for a long moment. You planned this from the beginning, she said. This wasn't improvised. You knew about the task force. You knew what documentation they needed. You had a contact already. She watched his face. This has been in motion for longer than I've been in this house. He held her gaze and didn't deny it. Some of it, he said, the pieces were already there. You accelerated the timeline. Because Vulov tried to kill my children. Because Vulov tried to kill your children, he confirmed. And because I had been waiting long enough. The 4 years, she said quietly. Is it in there in what his man brought you? Are you in those records? The question sat between them. She watched him decide how to answer it, not whether to answer honestly, she'd already established that between them, but how to carry the weight of the answer. Yes, he said, my name is in there. Actions I took during those 4 years are in there. He was steady, but she could feel the cost of the steadiness. The contact I have at the task force knows about my history. We have an arrangement. In exchange for the documentation, I bring them a certain pages of those records will be handled appropriately. Handled appropriately, she repeated. That's careful wording. It's the most honest wording I have for what it means. Does it mean you're safe? She asked. From the legal consequences of what you did then? It means I've been building toward a version of safe for 8 years, he said. Tonight moves that forward more than anything else has. She looked at him. She thought about what it must feel like to carry 4 years of choices that you decided to spend the next 8 undoing. She thought about her own 6 weeks, about the much smaller scale of decisions she wished she could go back and alter. She thought about the gap between who a person has been and who they're working to become, and about whether that gap can ever fully close. I think you're a good man who did bad things, she said, and I think you've been punishing yourself for it in ways that aren't particularly useful. He looked at her. I'm not in a position to judge anyone's past right now, she said. I was married to a man for 9 years and apparently didn't know half of what was true about him, and whatever you did 12 years ago, you came back. You stopped. You've hurt him. She held his gaze. That's not nothing. Ren from his post near the wall made a sound, not a word. Just an acknowledgement of something, a sound that meant this is true without requiring language. Domingo looked at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, his face had something in it she hadn't seen in the 36 hours she'd known him. Not vulnerability exactly, he was too structured for vulnerability to show clearly, but the thing next to it, the thing just underneath. Your children are going to be safe, he said. I want you to hear that and believe it, not because I need you to be grateful, but because I need you to actually believe it for yourself. I do believe it, she said. Do you? She thought about the road, the cold, the baby going quiet, the moment she'd raised her arm and a car had stopped, the sequence of things that had needed to go right and had. I'm starting to, she said. That's the most honest answer I have. He accepted this the way he accepted most things, without performance, without pushing, with the kind of quiet respect that had no conditions attached to it. At 2 a.m, with Ren asleep in the chair near the front door and the house fully quiet, Domingo was still at the kitchen table and Christina was still across from him, and they were talking. Not about Vulov, not about the task force or the records or what happened next in the series of events that had been put in motion. They were talking the way people talk when the crisis has passed its peak and they find themselves suddenly in the same space with no immediate emergency and the strange intimacy of having been through something together. He told her about his mother. She asked. He answered, which surprised her slightly and didn't surprise her at all. His mother had come to this country from El Salvador when Domingo was 4. She had worked 2 jobs and then 3. She had been the kind of woman who laughed loudly and argued fiercely, and never once in all the years Domingo could remember asked anyone for anything. When Domingo was 9, she had been in a car accident on a road outside the city, and she had waited for 2 hours in the cold for someone to stop. No one stopped. She'd survived everything, but something had broken in those 2 hours. Not her body. Something more fundamental. She used to say that was when she learned the truth about the world, Domingo said. His voice was even, but she could hear what was underneath it, the 9-year-old who had waited at home, the boy who had understood something irrevocable that night. She said she'd told herself before that moment that people were fundamentally decent. That night convinced her otherwise. And you, Christina asked, what did it convince you? That she was wrong, he said, about people being fundamentally decent, but also that she was right. He looked at the mug. People are decent when it costs them nothing. When it costs them something, when stopping on a dark road means being late, means getting involved, means dealing with someone else's problem, that's when you find out what someone actually is. You stopped, she said. I was already the kind of person who should have stopped 20 years ago and didn't, he said. Last night I stopped. She looked at him for a moment. Do you think that makes up for it, the things you didn't do before? He met her eyes. No, he said simply and completely. But it's what I have. She nodded. She understood that. She understood it in the deep way that only people who have lived with the math of loss and repair understand it, the way the 2 numbers never fully balance, but the attempt still matters, still means something. Raymond used to say he was going to fix it, she said. Whatever it was, the money, the distance, the things I could feel between us that neither of us named. He was always going to fix it. Next month, next year, when things settled down, she paused. He ran out of time. I know, Domingo said. The thing that makes me most angry, she said, and she was surprised to find it was true, surprised to hear herself say it out loud in a voice that was steady, isn't that he kept things from me. It's that he thought he was protecting me by doing it. He thought the less I knew, the safer I was. And it was exactly backwards. She pressed her fingers against the table. I was least safe because I didn't know. Domingo was quiet for a moment. Some people love each other and still end up facing opposite directions, he said. It's one of the more painful things that's true. She looked at him. That sounds like experience. He met her eyes. It is, he said, and left it exactly there. She didn't push. Some doors you could feel were not ready to open, and you respected that. She'd had her own doors closed for 6 weeks. She understood the geometry of it. When this is over, she said, what happens? What do you mean? I mean, what happens to us? To me and the children. Where do we go from here? She paused. My house isn't safe. My sister's address was compromised. Raymond's debt is going to take time to legally void, even if the task force moves quickly. I have 3 children and no car and $62 in a checking account, and I don't, she stopped, steadied. I don't know what the next step looks like. Your sister's address is safe now, Domingo said. Vulov's people won't go near it again. By tomorrow, there will be too much federal attention on his operation to risk it. You can go to your sister's. And after that, he said, you start over. He said it simply without making it smaller or larger than it was. It's hard. It's one of the hardest things there is, but you've been doing hard things since before I met you. He looked at her. You'll do this one too. With what? She asked. I have $62. The task force will freeze Vulov's assets. Among those assets are several collections, money taken from debtors under coercion. There's a restitution process. He held her gaze. I've already spoken to them about Raymond's case. You'll be part of that. She stared at him. When did you? Last night before the meeting. He was matter-of-fact about it. It was part of what I negotiated. She sat back in her chair. She looked at him with the particular feeling of a person who keeps finding out that someone thought ahead in ways they couldn't have anticipated. It was disorienting. It was the opposite of the last 6 weeks. The last 6 weeks had been nothing but discovering too late the things that hadn't been thought about. You negotiated restitution for me, she said. For Raymond's family, he said, which is the same thing. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry. She had made it through 36 hours of the most impossible series of events in her life without crying in front of anyone, and she was not going to start now at 1 a.m. in a kitchen with a man who had in less than 2 days done more for her children than she'd known was possible. Thank you, she said. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough. The words were too small for what they were carrying. He looked at her steadily. You would have found a way, he said, with or without me. Maybe, she said, but with you was better. Something moved through his face. Quiet and real and not performed for her benefit, just there briefly visible like light coming through a window that usually stays closed. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down. His expression shifted, not alarm, not quite, but the focus of a man whose attention has been recalled by something that requires it. He looked up at her. The task force moved early, he said. They're not waiting until morning. Is that good? It's very good, he stood. It means they were ready. It means what I brought them tonight was what they needed. He picked up the phone. It also means the next 12 hours are going to be loud. Vulov will know something is happening before they get to him. There'll be movement. He met her eyes. You need to stay here until I tell you it's clear. I know, she said. I mean it, Christina. First time he'd used her first name without the Mrs. She noticed it. She thought he knew she noticed it. Don't answer the door. Don't call anyone except the number I gave you. Don't. Domingo. She kept her voice level. I walked 2 miles in a blizzard with a newborn baby and 2 kids because someone told me to stay home, and I decided not to. She held his gaze. I know how to make a decision when it matters. Trust that. He looked at her for a beat. 2. I do, he said, simply the way he said things that were simply true. He moved toward the door. Ren was already up, already awake, apparently the kind of person who slept at the level of a cat and arrived fully functional without transition. They spoke in low voices, near the door, the rapid shorthand of people who have worked together long enough that whole sentences can live in a word. Domingo turned back one more time. When it's over, he said, I'll come back. She looked at him. I know, she said. He nodded once, he opened the door. He walked out into whatever the night had left of itself, and the door closed behind him, and Christina sat in the warm kitchen with the sound of her children sleeping above her and the hum of the house around her and the particular quiet of a moment that is not yet resolution but is no longer crisis. She put both hands flat on the table. She breathed. She thought about Raymond and about the road and about the way certain nights take everything from you and leave you something you couldn't have gotten any other way. She thought about what starting over actually looked like, not the abstract idea of it, the real thing. The $62, the sister's house, the children needing shoes and schools and some version of normal that they'd never exactly had and would have to build from scratch. The work of it, the long, unglamorous, necessary work of putting a life back together when the original plans are gone. She was not afraid of it. That was new. That was something she registered and held carefully the way you hold something fragile that you didn't expect to find. 6 weeks ago, she'd been afraid of everything, every phone call, every number she didn't recognize, every morning that arrived without Raymond in it, every reminder that she was doing this alone. She was still alone in most of the practical ways. But the fear had changed shape because she had stood on a road and raised her arm and the car had stopped. Because she had been the kind of person who left the house when they told her to stay. Because she had looked a man who frightened her in the face and demanded honesty and gotten it. She realized, still standing. And tomorrow she would still be standing. And the day after that. She picked up her coffee cup, found it cold, and got up to make another. She stood at the counter and listened to the house breathe around her, the heat through the floors, the children upstairs, the faint sound of the world outside beginning somewhere at its edges to change. She waited. The call came at 4:47 in the morning. Christina had not slept. She had tried once around 3 o'clock, had laid down on the couch with her phone on her chest, and her eyes closed and her mind running at a speed that sleep could not catch, and given up after 20 minutes. She was back at the kitchen table with her third cup of coffee when the phone lit up and Ren's number appeared on the screen and she answered before the first ring finished. "It's done," Ren said. 2 words. She pressed her free hand flat against the table. "Vulov?" she asked. "Federa custody as of 40 minutes ago. His building, his car, 3 of his secondary locations, all simultaneous. They move fast once they started." A pause. Petrov is already talking. Apparently he decided that loyalty has a ceiling. "And Domingo?" "Here, he's fine." Ren's voice carried something she hadn't heard in it before, a looseness minimal, but real, like a knot that has been released by exactly 1 degree. "He wants to come back. He's asking if the children are still sleeping." She almost laughed. After everything, after the blizzard and the road, and the gas line that was supposed to look like an accident, and the federal operation, and the night that had lasted approximately 1 full year, the first question Domingo asked was whether the children were still sleeping. "Tell him yes," she said. "Tell him to come back." She set the phone down. She put both hands over her face. She stayed like that for 10 seconds. Not crying, not quite, but something adjacent to it, something that had no clean name. Then she took her hands down. She straightened. She got up and checked on the children. Marcus still deep under the stuffed animal tucked against his chin. Sophie on her back, now one arm thrown wide, the particular sprawl of a child who has finally let go. And she checked Daniel, who was making the small preliminary sounds of someone who would want to eat within the hour. And she went back downstairs and made fresh coffee. She was going to need it. The next hours were going to require her to be awake and functional and capable of the kind of clear thinking that exhaustion likes to erode. There would be calls to make to Ellen, who still didn't know the full shape of what had happened, to the children's school eventually, to whoever handled the practical aftermath of a federal asset freeze and a restitution process she didn't yet understand. There would be forms, probably. Explanations, the long, unglamorous machinery of things becoming official. But first, Domingo was coming back through the door. She stood at the counter and acknowledged that this mattered to her in a way that was not just gratitude, and she let herself acknowledge it fully and without apology, and then she filed it carefully in the place where it belonged, which was not today, not with the coffee still brewing, and Vulov freshly in handcuffs and her children asleep upstairs. Today was for the children. Today was for starting to understand what safe actually felt like when it was real. The rest could wait. Some things got better for the waiting. He came through the door at 5:23, and he looked like a man who had been awake for 30 hours and had done significant things in most of them. He looked also like a man from whom something heavy had been removed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the specific way that happens when a weight you've been carrying long enough that you forgot its shape is finally set down and you feel the absence of it in your shoulders, your hands, the way you move. Ren came in behind him and went directly to the coffee pot with the focused intention of a man who has earned it. Domingo looked at Christina. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment, which was its own kind of conversation. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he confirmed. "Vulov. In federal custody. They have Petrov's testimony, the documentation from last night, and enough additional material to occupy his lawyers for approximately the rest of his natural life." He sat down. He moved with the particular deliberateness of someone managing physical tiredness through an act of will. "The task force lead called me an hour ago. Raymond's file has been formally opened as a homicide. The men responsible are already named." Christina sat down across from him. "It'll go to trial." "Yes, it'll take time. These things always take time." He held her gaze. "But it will go." She nodded. She absorbed the weight of what it meant for Raymond's death to be named correctly, to be pursued, to be answered for in some real and official way. She had not let herself want this, had not let herself think about justice, because justice had seemed so far from the immediate problem of keeping her children alive. Now that the immediate problem was resolved, justice moved closer. It was real. It had a shape. "He'll have a record now," she said quietly. "Raymond. What he knew. What he accidentally witnessed. It'll be part of the public record eventually. Yes. Our children will be able to read it someday. Marcus and Sophie and Daniel." She paused. "They'll know their father died because he saw something he wasn't supposed to see, not because he was..." She stopped. "They won't have to be ashamed of him." Domingo looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "They won't." She pressed her fingers against the edge of the table. "That matters to me more than the money," she said. "The restitution, the debt, all of it matters, but that matters most." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "How did you know that?" "Because it's what I would have needed," he said, simply. "If my father had died the way Raymond died in circumstances that could be misread, that could become something shameful, I would have needed someone to make sure the true version was the one that stood." He paused. "So I made sure." She felt the weight of this land, not just the act, the anticipation of it. The fact that he had thought about what she would need before she'd had the space to identify it herself. "Domingo," she said. And then she stopped because the sentence she'd started had too many things in it for this hour of the morning, and she wasn't sure yet which one to finish with. He waited. He was very good at waiting. "Thank you," she said finally. "I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't cover it. But I don't have anything bigger." "You don't owe me anything," he said. "That's not why I'm saying it." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "I know that's not why." Marcus came downstairs at 6:45, sleep-rumpled and immediately hungry, and the morning shifted into the particular gear of a morning with children in it, the gear that requires cereal and questions, and the management of small needs that do not pause for large circumstances. This was Christina had found over the past 6 weeks, one of the genuine mercies of having children. They kept pulling you back into the present. You couldn't sustain grief or fear at full volume when someone needed to know where their left shoe was. Marcus stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at Domingo with the direct assessment of a 7-year-old. "You came back," Marcus said. "I said I would," and Domingo replied. Marcus appeared to find this satisfactory. "Did you fix it?" he asked. "The bad stuff." "Most of it," Domingo said. "The rest is being worked on." Marcus nodded, apparently processing the acceptable margin of not yet finished. "Are we still in danger?" he asked, with the particular casualness of a child who has decided to be brave about the answer. "No," Domingo said, and this time it was unqualified. "No, mostly no for now. Just no." Marcus looked at him for one more beat, then he climbed onto the stool at the counter and said, "Can I have eggs?" to the general room, and Ren, without a word, without apparent surprise, stood up and went to the refrigerator. Christina watched Ren make eggs for her 7-year-old son at 6 in the morning in a safe house they were going to leave today, and she thought, I will remember this. Whatever happens next, I will remember exactly this. Sophie came down 20 minutes later. She sat down next to Marcus and accepted the plate Ren put in front of her and looked at Domingo across the table with those serious, assessing eyes. It's over, she asked. It's over, he said. Sophie looked at her mother. Something passed between them. A look that contained the 6 weeks and the road and the cold and everything that had come after all of it compressed into 2 seconds of eye contact between a mother and her 9-year-old daughter who had both been too old for too long. Then Sophie picked up her fork and started eating, and that was that. The call from the federal task force came at 8:15. A woman named Agent Torres, voice efficient and not unkind, who said words that Christina had to write down because her brain was too tired to hold them in sequence. Asset freeze confirmed a restitution. Process initiated formal victim notification to follow in writing. You'll be contacted by the assigned advocate within 72 hours. She also said near the end, Mrs. Ward, I want you to know that the documentation we received last night was critical. Your husband's case is going to be prosecuted fully. That wouldn't have happened without it. Christina said, thank you, and ended the call and sat very still for a moment. Then she went to where Domingo was standing near the window, not looking out, following his own rule, but near it, the way people stand near the things they can't quite look at. And she said, the agent said the documentation was critical. Good, he said. She doesn't know it came from you. No, he said. She doesn't need to. Christina looked at him. Does that bother you, doing something significant and not being able to claim it? He considered this with the seriousness he brought to questions that deserved it. 8 years ago, it would have, he said. Now, no, the outcome is the thing. What I get credit for is not the thing. That's either very wise or very sad, she said. Possibly both, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved and she was glad. She was glad for that small evidence of something lighter underneath the weight. They left the safe house at 10 in the morning. The drive to Ellen's would take 40 minutes. Ren drove. Domingo sat in the front. Christina sat in the back with the children, Daniel in his carrier between her and Sophie Marcus, against her other side with the stuffed animal, and 3 train books that he'd apparently decided were his now. The world outside looked different in the daylight. After a storm washed clean, quieter, the violence of the night before settled into something still. Everything that had been obscured by white was now visible again, sharp-edged and real. Mom, Marcus said about 10 minutes into the drive, when we get to Aunt Ellen's, can I tell her about the blizzard? Yes, Christina said. Can I tell her about Domingo? Christina glanced at the front seat. Domingo's profile was forward-facing, giving nothing away. Yes, she said. You can tell her about Domingo. Can I tell her he's not in the Mafia? From the front seat, Ren made a sound. It was Christina realized the first time she had heard Ren come close to laughing. You can tell her he handles problems, Christina said. Marcus considered this. That's basically the same thing, but cooler, he decided and went back to his book. Sophie, who had been looking out the window, said quietly, Are we coming back? To what? Christina asked. To here, the city, our house, and pause. To Domingo. Christina looked out her own window. The question had 3 parts and different answers. The city probably not, or not immediately, not until things settled. The house she didn't know yet, didn't know if she wanted to go back to the place that held 6 weeks of fear along with 9 years of other things. And the third part, I don't know about the house, she said honestly. We'll figure that out. She paused. As for Domingo, that's not really geography, Soph. That's just whether people stay in your life. Sophie looked at her. Do you want him to stay in your life? Christina felt Domingo very still in the front seat. Yes, she said, steady and simple and not performing anything. I do. Nothing happened for a moment. Then Domingo said to the windshield, to no one in particular, in a voice that was quiet and without embellishment. That goes both ways. Marcus looked up from his book. He looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at Marcus. Some silent 7- and 9-year-old communication happened that Christina couldn't decode. Then Marcus went back to his book, and Sophie went back to the window, and the car moved through the clean, quiet morning, and no one said anything else for a while. They didn't need to. Ellen came out the front door before the car had fully stopped. She was 53 years old and she moved like someone who had been awake since Christina's last call and had spent the hours between then and now working herself up to a level of worry that could only be discharged by physical action. She was down the porch steps and at the car door before Ren had the engine off, and when Christina got out, Ellen grabbed her by both arms and held on. "I've been calling you for 2 days," Ellen said into her shoulder. "I know, my phone died." "Your phone died." Ellen pulled back and looked at her the way older sisters look, cataloging everything, running the full assessment. "You look terrible." "Thank you. You look like you haven't slept since Tuesday." "I haven't." "And the babies." Ellen was already looking past her at Sophie climbing out of the car, at Marcus right behind her clutching his stuffed animal, at Daniel in his carrier that Christina was lifting out carefully. Ellen pressed both hands to her mouth. "Oh, they're okay. They're all okay." Her voice broke on the last word and she reached for Marcus, first grabbed him in a hug that he accepted but with the slightly martyred expression of a 7-year-old who has been informed that boys his age think hugging is optional but is privately still completely fine with it. "Aunt Ellen, did you know the longest train in history was 4.5 miles long?" Marcus said into her shoulder. "I did not know that," Ellen said, holding him tighter. Sophie stepped into the hug without being asked, which was the most purely Sophie thing Christina had seen in weeks, the decision made privately to allow herself this one unself-conscious thing. Christina held Daniel and watched her sister hold her children and felt something in her chest that was too large and too complicated for one word. Relief was part of it. Grief was part of it. Raymond should have been here for this, should have been standing next to her watching his kids get swallowed by their aunt, should have had the chance to fix what was broken between them. Love was part of it, not romantic love, not the complicated love of a marriage that had been failing in ways she hadn't fully admitted, but the love of her own life, her own children, the stubborn ongoing fact of them. She was here. They were all here. Ellen came to her last. She took one look at Christina's face, the full, honest wreck of it, 2 days of everything written in the lines around her eyes and the set of her jaw, and she said nothing. She just put her arms around her, around the baby and all, and held on. Christina let her. She stood in her sister's arms on the front walkway and let herself be held for the first time in 6 weeks and felt the grief and the fear and the rage and the relief move through her in one long wave, and she breathed through it and it passed and she was still standing. Domingo and Ren did not come inside. Christina had expected this. She had known somewhere that this was how it would go, that the handoff would happen at the car, not at the kitchen table. Men like Domingo did not do well with the domestic warmth of a sister's house and hot coffee and a woman crying into someone's shoulder. It wasn't coldness. It was just a different geometry of the world. She walked back to the car after a few minutes. Ellen had taken the children inside with the focused energy of someone who had sandwiches and hot chocolate planned in advance and was going to deploy both immediately. Domingo was standing by the car. Ren was already in the driver's seat, giving them the privacy of forward-facing. "She seems good," Domingo said, meaning Ellen. "She's the kind of person who shows love by solving problems," Christina said. "She's going to feed my children until they can't move and ask me 40 questions I can't fully answer, and then she's going to quietly handle 3 things I didn't ask her to handle because that's how she operates." She paused. "She's the best person I know." "Good," he said. "You need good people." She looked at him. She had rehearsed nothing. She had no prepared words. Everything she was about to say was going to arrive in real time, which was probably right. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, "and I've already said that, and you've already told me I don't owe you anything, and I know that's true. But I want you to understand that what you did, it wasn't just the Vulov thing, the debt, the federal case. It was you stopped on the road." She held his gaze. "You stopped, and you treated me like a person who deserved accurate information and actual decisions. You didn't manage me. You didn't protect me from the truth." She felt her voice want to tighten and held it steady. "I have not been treated that way in a very long time, and it mattered. It matters." Domingo looked at her for a long moment. His face had that quality it got when he was receiving something he didn't know how to put down. "You would have found the road," he said. "You were already moving." "I was moving," she said. "You showed me where to go." He was quiet. "Then where do you go from here?" She thought about it, really thought the way you can only think when the emergency is over and the ground is actually solid under your feet. Ellen's for now. Figure out the house, the schools, the practical machinery of a life that needs rebuilding. She looked at him, put one foot in front of the other until it starts to look like something. And then keep going. A pause. That's all any of us do. He nodded slowly, the nod that meant he'd filed something real. I'll be in contact, he said, about the restitution process, the timeline. There will be things to sign, decisions to make. I'll make sure you have what you need. That's not the only reason to be in contact, she said. She said it without embellishment, without apology, without looking away. He met her eyes. No, he said, it's not. She reached out her hand, not a dramatic gesture, just her hand offered the way you offer a hand to someone you wanted to mark the moment with. He took it. His hand was warm and large and completely steady, and they shook once and held for a beat, past the shake, and let go. Come back, she said, when it's settled, when you have time. Come back and meet them properly, not as the man who found us in a blizzard, but just as a person. She held his gaze. I think my kids would like that. I think I would too. Domingo looked at her one more time with that deep private look of his, the one that had nothing performed in it, the one that said whatever it said without translating it into something smaller. I'll come back, he said. She believed him. She turned and walked up the front path and did not look back because she had learned in the last 2 days that some things you trust without watching them. She heard the car start. She heard it pull away. She kept walking. Inside the house, Marcus was already deep into explaining trains to Ellen, who was listening with genuine attention and periodically saying, "Is that right?" in the tone of someone who means it. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of hot chocolate, both hands around it, watching her brother with an expression that was soft around the edges in a way she usually kept private. Daniel was in Ellen's arms. Ellen had picked him up the moment she got inside and had not put him down, and the look on her face when she held him, the full, unguarded love of a woman holding her sister's new baby, was something Christina was going to carry for a long time. Christina stood in the doorway and watched her family occupy the warm, ordinary space of her sister's kitchen, and she let the realness of it land. All of them, present, breathing, safe in the actual meaning of the word, not just alive, not just surviving, but protected, housed, fed, held. She had stood on a road with nothing but her children and her own refusal to stop moving, and she had raised her arm in the dark, and the car had stopped. She would spend years understanding all the ways that moment had changed things. She would have hard days, she knew this didn't pretend otherwise. Days when the money would be tight, and the kids would be struggling, and Raymond's absence would land on her like something physical, and she would have to build the forward motion from scratch again. There would be forms to sign and court dates to follow, and the guacamole slow process of grief that doesn't run on anyone's preferred timeline. But she would not be afraid in the way she had been afraid. That particular fear, the one that had made her small, made her wait, made her accept things that were not acceptable. That fear had been burned out of her somewhere on a road in a blizzard in the moment she decided not to stay home. Marcus looked up from his train conversation and spotted her in the doorway. Mom, Aunt Ellen says she has books about trains too, old ones, from when she was little. That's great, baby. Can I look at them after breakfast? Yes. He went back to his explanation with renewed energy. Ellen caught Christina's eye over the top of his head and smiled wide, warm, slightly watery at the edges and mouthed, "He's okay." I know, Christina mouthed back. We all are. She walked into the kitchen. She sat down at the table next to her daughter. She put her arm around Sophie, who leaned into her without comment, without resistance, with the full, uncomplicated weight of a child who has decided that her mother is solid ground. Daniel made a small sound in Ellen's arms, a small, perfect sound of protest in life, and Ellen adjusted her hold and looked down at him and said softly to the baby, to no one, to the whole ordinary morning, "There you are. There you are." Christina Ward, who had walked 2 miles in a blizzard with nothing but her children and the decision not to stop, put her hand over her daughters and looked at her son and listened to her baby's voice fill the room. She had come through. She had brought them through. And whatever road came next, she knew exactly what kind of woman walked it. The kind who raises her arm in the dark. The kind who does not wait to be saved. The kind who, when the car stops, gets in and when it's over, walks forward. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. She just hadn't known it until the storm.